right, welcome into a special edition, a Friday edition of the Goodman and podcast. And joining me is former NBC writer Rob Dauster, pitching in here after the news that surfaced late last night, Thursday night. The news broke from both The Athletic and myself from Stadium. Gregg Marshall under investigation by Wichita State for numerous allegations, including one that he punched former player Shaq Morris in October 2015. I talked to Shaq Morris. There are other allegations as well, Rob. As we saw there, he body shamed a former player who I chose to keep his name out of the story because he's dealing with anxiety, mental health issues. He choked former assistant coach Kyle Lindstedt, according to multiple sources. I talked to more than 35 players for this. And the big question that everybody's going to want to know now is, does Gregg Marshall, the Wichita State coach, who's beloved by many in Wichita, took them to a Final Four, does he keep his job?
Well, first and foremost, I just want to make clear that The Athletic, CJ Moore, Dane O'Neill, they're the ones that broke the story. You kind of follow with the 35 people a couple hours later. So let's give all the credit to them, Jeff. They did all the hard work.
They did a good job. They beat me on it.
You had your little follow-up. So I'm going to give CJ and Dane all the credit on this one. For people that don't understand, I am joking. Jeff did a very good job on the story. But as far as whether or not Gregg Marshall should keep his job, I don't understand how you can keep him after this. You have a player on the record saying that he got punched twice from behind by the coach of the basketball program. How do you keep your job after that? You have multiple people saying that he choked an assistant coach. How do you keep your job after that? And you didn't even mention some of the most problematic stuff, which were, let's just, at best, you can call it racially problematic language that he was using. At worst, you could say that he was being a flat out racist to some of the players on his roster that were not white. So I understand. Let me put it like this. Gregg Marshall's relationship with the Koch brothers is one of the reasons why he makes as much money as he does, why the Wichita State athletic department is able to bring in the money that they make, and why he is still in Wichita right now instead of being someplace like in Alabama, where they basically offered him a blank check to go take that job. Or I believe, wasn't he offered UCLA, or he was in talks with you? Whatever.
Yeah, they didn't offer him a job. NC State wanted him. I mean, he's gotten, and actually Marshall and I have had a hot and cold relationship over the years. I'll be completely transparent. I wish somebody would, bring up the call years ago, the year that they went to the Final Four.
I'll bring it up. You want me to tell that story? So
yeah, I'd like to hear it though. I would like to relive it. I'd like to hear it. I could say it. It's no big deal. On Dan Patrick.
Let me tell it because it's better when it comes to me. So what happened was Gregg Marshall makes it to the Final Four. This is a huge moment for him, a huge moment for his program. He finally breaks through. They were a number 9 seed at Wichita State, and they make it to the Final Four. And Jeff is on the Dan Patrick show, right? And he's leading into Gregg Marshall. Gregg Marshall is coming on next. And
I didn't know that.
Yeah, well, what happens is you say to Dan Patrick, yeah, well, most people in coaching think that Gregg Marshall is an asshole.
Here's what, no, let me set it up a little bit better. Wait.
The first question that Gregg Marshall is asked when he comes on the Dan Patrick show, this huge nationally syndicated radio program celebrating the most important milestone in his coaching career, is, how do you feel about Jeff Goodman saying that everybody thinks you're an asshole? That's what happened.
Not exactly. Close. Exactly. Dan Patrick's question to me was, why hasn't Gregg Marshall gotten a bigger job? And I said, you want to know the truth? Yes. I said, because there are a ton of people in the business that don't like Gregg Marshall. Okay. I didn't know Gregg was on next. I don't care that he was on next. Not a big deal to me. They lead into Gregg with my quote. Gregg Marshall comes back and says, well, I could say the same thing about Jeff Goodman.
And he's right.
Who cares? Who cares? Well, now we know, obviously, why Gregg Marshall wasn't able to get some of those plum elite level jobs, because the guy can coach his ass off. There's no denying Gregg Marshall is a terrific X and O's basketball coach, but how he does his job right now is in question. And as you mentioned, some of the other things that we haven't talked about. How about this? Shaq Morris, the day that he is punched twice by Gregg Marshall, told me He had hours earlier in a meeting in Gregg Marshall's office told him that Shaq's mother has cancer. Shaq found that out. They hadn't told Shaq for years. They didn't want to kind of bother him and really make him deal with anything more than he was already dealing with in Wichita. And he tells Gregg Marshall that his mother's got cancer. And hours later, Marshall goes off on him and punches him. And I got, Shaq Morris on the record. And that was the big thing, Rob, for me was people say like, well, why did it take so long? Like I started this back in April when there was a rash of transfers. That's how this started, was looking into why would 7 people, which is an unheard of number, transfer out of the Wichita State program. Really good players, Eric Stevenson, Jamarius Burton. Sometimes you'll see 5 players that all average, a point to 5 points a game. This was double-digit scores, young guys that had promise, Noah Fernandez, and they all left. So I started making calls that way and started getting more and more information about some of the things that Gregg Marshall had done in the past. So I literally
take us through that, because I'm always interested in these kinds of things, Jeff. You say it was a 6-month investigation, right? Just kind of take me through and take the listeners through step by step how that works. Like, right? Like, what's the first thing that you hear? What do you do after that? Like, how does this kind of reporting work, and why does something this big take 6 months for you to do? Just kind of walk people through that step by step.
Well, listen, the biggest, again, when it started, it's you got to get organized, right? You start making a phone call. Social media is great these days because you can connect with kids via, they're following me on Twitter, they're on Facebook, kids are overseas. So you're reaching out to people and having these conversations. And most of them, again, were off the record. The kids aren't going to put their names on it, especially those that were transferring, because they're looking for new homes. So they can't put their names out there at that point because they're worried that Gregg Marshall is going to crush them and they're not going to be able to find high major homes, even though they're good enough. You just never know. So they're all unwilling. Then you're hearing stories. And I've never done a story, Rob, where it was easier to get other stories about Gregg Marshall, about a subject matter. And I've done a lot of these. I haven't done a lot lately, investigative, but I did a lot early in my career. And I've never had it so easy where you just, okay, this person would tell me this story about another player. So then I just track down the other player. All right, confirm that story. And oh, by the way, you got anything else? Yeah, I got something else. I got plenty more. And a lot of the stories I didn't include in this, Rob, were kind of crude comments, right? Like one that I didn't put in there, and I'm not going to say the name of the player, but a former player, Gregg Marshall, he was dating a stripper at the time. Gregg Marshall telling the player, go get your stripper girlfriend off her pole and come get you. Like things of that nature. To me, again, not at the level of, telling, Isaiah Poor Bear Chandler, who's of Native American descent, to get back on his horse, right? To make howling Indian noises. Those are the things that I thought were obviously far more appropriate and honestly devastating to hear. I mean, again, you listen, this isn't 30 years ago. Times have changed. Some of the things, again, that he said, I'll give you one. He had 3 big men, and he would refer to them as 21 feet of grade A. The word starts with P. I'm not going to say it on the podcast. You can figure out what it is. Again, a lot of people laugh at that. Is that a huge deal? I'm sure that's been said in other practices, but I think, again, when you hit a player, and to get back to the original story. So I kept reporting, and my take was, I'm going to do this thing right. I'm not going to do it for clicks. I could have put this up there, according to sources, probably in May or June. Instead, I talked to as many people as I can, former players, former coaches. I went back to even his Winthrop days. I have Winthrop stories that I didn't include from former coaches there that he ran out of the business. So I think I wanted to make sure it was as airtight as humanly possible. And the reason why I ran it yesterday, well, there were 2. The Athletic beat my ass on it, which give credit to CJ Moore and Dana O'Neill. They deserve it. But I was going to write it yesterday anyway. And the reason is, and you know this, I drove to Portland, Maine, to Maine the other night to talk to Shaq Morris, finally on the record. And I recorded it because I didn't know you can record it in Maine. You're allowed to record it with one party consent in Maine. Anyway, it's irrelevant. I had talked to Shaq Morris one time off the record about a month and a half ago. And he said that he was going to be willing to go on the record at some point. So really, I was waiting for Shaq Morris to be ready to tell his story. And I didn't want to do it with all sources. I felt like obviously it's a stronger story and I wanted to give him a chance. I didn't feel the need to have to rush this story out there. I wanted to do it right and do it in the best way possible. And again, make it airtight. And so Shaq Morris, we talked for about an hour 2 nights ago on Wednesday night at about, I think I got home at about midnight, got up, finished the story. I already had the story pretty much written and added all the Shaq Morris stuff in. And yesterday, obviously on Thursday, we were trying to get it through legal, at the company. And that took a while, but so here we are. And, the investigation, my investigation triggered Wichita State's investigation. And now they're towards the end of that. Now they're nearing the end of it. And the big question is, so I talked to Shaq Morris. I asked him the other night, did you talk to the investigator who called from the law firm? And he said, no. And a lot of the players said the same thing to me. They didn't trust that the law firm was going to be objective, was going to be neutral, that it was hired by Wichita State. They were worried that it was just for the look of it, that it wasn't a real investigation. So a lot of these guys, I don't know what all of them said, but a lot of these guys did not come clean with what happened. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of this investigation. But obviously now it's a little bit different when you've got Shaq Morris on the record. I have the phone conversation recorded. And it's going to be interesting to see what Wichita, the fan base, what are they like, right? Because again, Gregg Marshall is revered. Does this change their tune, or are they win at all costs? We don't care. We're good with him.
There are a lot of questions that I have about this, and things that are probably going to have to get sorted out. First and foremost is, how did it go on this long without the athletic department, the athletic administration, Gregg Marshall's bosses finding out about it? Like, your job is to make sure that you don't have an abusive, bullying coach on your staff. And that's exactly what they had. Like, how did we get to this point 5 years after the fact that it's now just coming out and we have to have a reporter come out and put this stuff out there, right? Like, why now? What are the point of having exit interviews if you're not going to find this stuff out while it's going on? What is the point of giving Gregg Marshall a boss if that boss isn't going to provide any kind of oversight, right? How does Kyle Lindstedt leave that program after getting choked and after seeing Shaq Morris get punched twice by Gregg Marshall and nothing happens, right? How is one coach allowed to have that much power within a university that none of this stuff comes out? Like, people have to answer those questions, right? Gregg Marshall's bosses have questions they have to answer. Some of them may have to go too. The other part of it, which is a little bit more complicated, is what does this do to Gregg Marshall's career? And you mentioned this earlier. At the end of the day, what matters is wins and losses when it comes to coaching, right? Normally we talk about this stuff when it comes to cheating and when it comes to breaking NCAA rules. Like, Bruce Pearl has a job right now because he's an awesome basketball coach and knows how to build a program. That's why he's back at Auburn after what happened at Tennessee, right?
Sure.
The same can be said for coaches that are just complete assholes and complete bullies. Like, Billy Clyde Gillespie is an absolute sociopath. You did a story on him like 9 years ago at Texas Tech. I did a story on him in March. And the reason I did the story on him in March is because he just got hired. He's had 2 jobs since everything that you reported at Texas Tech. And we could tweet out the links. We don't have to go through everything that Billy Clyde did. But let's just say that the shit that he did was just as, if not more problematic than what Gregg Marshall did. Because Billy Clyde Gillespie, you never know when he's actually sober and when he's going to get behind the wheel hammered and when he's going to get another DUI. So he has another job. He just got hired by Tarleton State, a Division I
school.
Yeah. Right. So the reason he got hired is because he wins basketball games. Like, you can say whatever you want about Billy Clyde Gillespie. He's an awful human being. He's a good coach. Great basketball coach.
Yep. And that's the problem here. That is the problem at the end of the day. To your first question, why did this go on for so long and nobody said anything? Winning breeds power. Power breeds fear. And that's what it came to with whether it's Darren Boatwright, the athletic director, the coaches who sat there and watched, Greg Heyer, right? Greg Heyer was an assistant coach for him. I talked to him off the record. He told me nothing. Didn't see anything, nothing. Come on. These guys saw things. They were scared of Gregg Marshall. They were scared of him. Now, again, to me, you're on staff that year when all that stuff happened, when Shaq Morris gets punched. And oh, by the way, after that in the story, I wrote, and not surprising to anybody, Fred VanVleet, the team leader, was the one who basically said, we ain't practicing until you apologize to Shaq. And he offered what I was told by multiple people was a half-assed apology to Shaq. And Shaq told me, he said, listen, I wasn't going to fight it because of my teammates. I didn't want to impact us and winning and all that. So I moved on physically, didn't really move on emotionally from all this. The player who got body shamed is still dealing with all this, Rob, was down in his basement for the last 3 years. I spoke to his father, unable to come upstairs, had never really discussed all this with his family until I talked to his father. And his father said he's doing much better actually over the last month and a half, because I think he realizes he wasn't alone. That there are a lot of other people out there that feel the same way about Gregg Marshall. Of the 36 people that I talked to, 2 of them stood up for Gregg Marshall. 2 of them basically said, I didn't see anything. Garrett Stutz was one of them. I was emailing with overseas, and I had heard an allegation about Marshall did something to Garrett Stutz, and he denied it. And he said it never happened. But 34 of these people, almost all of them said, I would never play or coach for Gregg Marshall again. And
I think it's important to note, you mentioned the player that has been battling depression and was in the basement. There are a lot of guys in this business that are really, really, really tough coaches, whether it's Bob Huggins or Frank Martin or Tom Izzo or even John Calipari. They are not afraid to mother F you up and down the sideline. They're not afraid to scream at you. Frank Martin's death stares are legendary in college basketball circles. Bob Huggins, the way he screams at his guys on the bench, everybody knows about that. The difference, and this is so important in this conversation, is the way that those players accept that yelling and that feedback. Because everyone that played for Bob Huggins will say okay, I'll go to war for him. I'll die for him. I'll take a bullet for him, because they know that all that screaming, all that yelling is out of genuine love. He's trying to get the most out of them, and he coaches them hard. But at the end of the day, there's going to be some kind of respect there. With Tom Izzo, I remember a couple of years ago when he really got into Aaron Henry on national television. I think it was during the NCAA tournament. It became a big thing. All of these bully college basketball coaches. Well, to me, it makes sense if you only see that video and kind of take it out of context. But the Michigan State program, I guarantee you, Aaron Henry is allowed to go right back at Tom Izzo just like that. Tom Izzo might curse out his players. Tom Izzo has no problem if his players curse him out. He wants that kind of competitive.
But they have
Draymond Green. Go ahead.
Those guys have that relationship, and this is the separate. And I think this is what you were getting to, is
about the relationship, the respect, knowing that you're getting yelled at because someone loves you and cares about you and is trying to get the best out of you and is going to come give you a hug at the end of the day, instead of just being completely demeaned and bullied and belittled, where you don't feel that love coming back. And that is the entire difference, right? Everything in life is about the relationship that you have with people and the way that what you're saying is perceived. What Gregg Marshall was saying was perceived as bullying, as being an asshole, because nobody thought that he actually cared about them. And he probably did.
You know what the word was? The word was that I heard more than anything from all the players I talked to was he made it personal.
Yes.
He made it personal. Jim Calhoun, I'll give you an example. Players hated Jim Calhoun when they were playing for him. Hated him. You talk to any player now, they love him. They respect him. Wichita State players, whether they're there then, now, I talked to several current players as well. Okay. Obviously, I'm not going to put their names out there because they're scared as hell. But it was consistent. They all said it was personal with Gregg Marshall. He would go after their families, anything that he knew that he could use against them, whether it was about the girlfriend, whether it was about somebody's father. I was told he went after Eric Stevenson's father hard all the time. And again, I mean, the players, the crazy part is, and there are a couple of quotes I put in there, it's crazy how us hating him made us closer. We all hated him. We were a tight knit off the court. We wanted to all beat Marshall up. If he wasn't the head coach, we'd whoop his ass. I'm not a fan. I'm not rooting for him. I got tired of being mother bleeped and being called the son of a bitch every single day. They all said that. All of them. It was amazing to me, again, that you didn't have more outliers than you had. And whether it was the kids who transferred, which I talked to a lot of them, I think 8 of the 10 that transferred over the last 2 years, I was able to talk to, but it was a ton of 4-year players that are revered in Wichita that were terrified. And that's the other part when people ask me, well, why won't they go on the record? Well, they're scared of Marshall because he's got power. They're also revered in Wichita. Why would I'm just throwing these 3 names out there. And one of them did talk to me off the record. Ron Baker, a Landry Shamet, a Fred VanVleet, 3 guys in the NBA. Why are they going to put their names on something right now when they are so revered in Wichita? What do they have to gain? Well, what they have to gain is that he changes the way he coaches, which was my thought all along, Rob. My thought all along was, honestly, there was a moment when I said to myself, I may not be able to write this story the way I want to write it, but you know what? If I can impact him coaching these kids differently, I'm going to make damn well sure he knows I have all this. So even if I never went with this story, I was going to call Gregg Marshall and say, I have this, this, and this. If I hear one more thing of you treating a coach or a player this way, I am going to publish it. Almost give him another opportunity. I decided not to do that because I feel like he probably doesn't deserve another opportunity to coach, in my opinion.
Yeah, he needs to be out. Like, look, there needs to be ramifications for coaches that behave this way, and other bully coaches. If you're listening to this, like, it's going to come out, right? Like, I just don't, in this day and age, I don't understand why people think that is going to work, right? Like, Gregg Marshall had all of this success. You want to know why he had success? Think about what was those teams that made the Final Four, those teams that went 35-1. They had 3 NBA players on it. Fred VanVleet, Ron Baker, Clee Anthony Early, all played in the NBA. You know who was on his coaching staff? Chris Jans, who was killing it at New Mexico State. Steve Forbes, who killed it at East Tennessee State, right? Jason Shea was on those staffs. Who else? I'm missing other names, but it doesn't matter. Like, he had an unbelievable coaching staff. He had 3 NBA players, and he was in the Missouri Valley. I think you can make the argument he underachieved with those guys. And now you got to give him credit for finding it, but when you have all of that together, you should be going 35-0 in the Missouri Valley.
Yeah, they obviously did a great job of evaluating.
You should go 35-0, right? Like,
listen, the guy, like we said, the guy can coach his ass off. There's no disputing that. It's how you're doing it and how you're dealing with these kids that I think, like you said, has to change. We're not living in the 80s anymore. Okay, we're in 2020 now. Things have changed, and again, my take is you've got so many different layers to this right now, to this story. And The Athletic had another one that I didn't go with. I had heard about it with him basically going after somebody who parked in his spot. I heard it was a track and field athlete, but I didn't put it in my story. I kept my story to basketball players.
The interaction was pretty funny because the guy parked in, according to The Athletic, this is what happened. The kid parked in Gregg Marshall's parking spot to go run into the athletic facility and come right out. When he pulled out, Gregg Marshall chased him down in his car, pulled in front of him, got out of the window and said, "Do you know who the F I am?" And the player in the car goes, "I don't give a F who you are." And Marshall tried to punch him through the window. I just love that response, though. "Do you know who I am? I don't care who you are."
I got another one that I'd heard a couple times on Marshall from years ago when he was interviewing for a job, that he walked in to the AD and basically said, "Why should I take this job?" Yeah. So anyway, all right. Well, listen, wanted to kind of go through a quick special podcast here about the news with Gregg Marshall. And obviously we'll see what comes of this moving forward. I would anticipate he is put on some sort of leave and suspension immediately.
So let's end it with this. Yeah. What odds are you going to put on Gregg Marshall coaching Wichita State basketball this year?
Listen, if it weren't 2020, and there's two layers to it, right? In 2020, you can't say those things, but in 2020, as we've seen, somebody says it's fake news, and people move on. I think it's going to be awfully difficult for him to keep his job going forward with the combination of allegations, and now Shaq Morris on the record saying he hit me. And trust me, again, I had 7 other players off the record, one more on the record in Ty Taylor, who agreed to tell me I saw it on the record. 5 more off the record that all said they saw it as well. So I just think the bottom line is unto itself, Rob, unto itself. If you only had that coach hitting a player, punching a player,
he's got to go.
You'd be fired. Then you're adding in all the other things, the body shaming, the choking the assistant coach, the call, doing Indian calls to a Native American player, telling him to get back on his horse. There was a kid who collapsed basically on the court, collapsed of exhaustion, the way, he had run him or during practice, and Marshall mocked him by collapsing. Like things of that nature that just, again, there's just no place for it. And I think ultimately, I don't know how he can survive this. I don't know how he can survive it. And to be honest, I mean, again, it's going to be very interesting to see what came out of their internal investigation, because their internal investigation might have dug up virtually nothing, because all the
that's irrelevant now that everything that you have is public.
It should be. I mean, it should be. And I think Shaq Morris wants to talk now to somebody from the university now that he's come clean and gotten his story out, and it's kind of a weight off his shoulders a little bit. I think from talking to him, he'd want to talk to various people at the highest level. Now, the other part of this, Rob, is the president of Wichita State got fired about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. He got fired. So they have an acting president. And part of the reason why he got fired was he canceled a speaking engagement at Wichita State from Ivana Trump back in like June. So that was the primary reason. But certainly when you look at this and the timing of him getting fired after ordering an internal investigation into Gregg Marshall, did that play in also? I don't know the answer to that yet. But again, yes, Gregg Marshall does have power in Wichita. So is it 100% that Gregg Marshall will get fired? Heck no.
It'll be a miraculous escape if you can have a player on the record saying he got punched twice from behind on the day he told that coach that his mom had cancer. If he can survive that, like, the dude's bulletproof. You might as well just give him a Superman cape right now.
All right. Well, listen, thanks for jumping on with me on short notice here, Rob. And we'll obviously keep you apprised to any Gregg Marshall ongoings throughout the end of this investigation and kind of what they end up doing. So we'll talk to you soon.